Cipanku Island is the latest addition to Temtem's early access build and brings forth a plethora of new Temtem, new traits, new gear items, some new features, an abundance of quality of life additions, and of course an expansion to the game's story. That said, this video aims to provide a breakdown of the new update in terms of the aforementioned story, gameplay, and of course new Temtem and features. I will keep the Cipanku spoilers to the minimum as far as major plot points and the game's mythical goes. However, there will be spoilers for everything up until Cipanku and minor Cipanku spoilers as well. This includes the original early access build, which ends at Tukma, and the various Kisiwa Island updates. All of this will culminate to answer the age-old question, is Temtem still worth the cash? Alright, so the Cipanku update picks up where we left off in Kisiwa. General X slapped us silly, and then proceeded to do the world a favor. That said, we now must travel to Cipanku to uncover the mystery behind the recent disappearances of various digital Temtem and alleged Belsodo activity. The story revolves around you following two separate leads that eventually converge into one. You have the investigation of the missing digital Temtem, which results in one of the scientists darting, and you have to chase them down. Then there's also a separate mission which involves you finding a Belsodo defector who's being hunted by the clan. These are serviceable plot points, though I don't think they particularly stand out either. Eventually the plots will converge and you must make your way to the monastery where two people of interest are hiding, and this area kind of feels cheap in terms of plot as well. Basically, without going into too much detail, there is Belsodo activity going on in this holy area in which only people of the church, aka pilgrims, are allowed to go to, and your player basically has to con the priest into allowing you to go. He essentially says no when you ask to go because you're not a pilgrim, then you use a loophole in which anyone is allowed to become a pilgrim and he can't judge you, therefore too bad. This isn't really the reason I find this part of the story kind of bland necessarily, but it's just that the whole area feels kind of like a big okay boomer meme, which can definitely be funny in small doses, but here at least I felt like it broke my immersion. Another NPC states that this priest is a wise character, but he just comes off as a one-dimensional caricature of an old person unwilling to accept change, regardless of the circumstances. Whilst this archetype does exist in real life and can be implemented in a good way, I think the mark was kind of missed here, making him look like a fool. I'd honestly rather the player straight up beat him down in a battle and force their way into the Holy Lands as an ends justify the means type deal and have to deal with the consequences or repercussions of that later. This would at least make the priest look like less of a joke and more of a serious character, willing to fight for their ideals. Other than that, the update does end just before what seems to be the main climax of the entire game, so we'll definitely have to include that portion in a future review. There are some other aspects to the story as well that I find somewhat lacking this time around, the first being the player's sorrow for Max, despite the fact that up until this point in the game, Max has been nothing but annoying and completely unlikable. The only redeeming quality of Max was that they didn't want to downright murder people in Kisiwa, which honestly isn't saying much. I would have preferred that the game build up Max's character to a breaking point in which they join Belsodo rather than being part of the clan from the beginning. There are a couple of pieces of dialogue that allude to the player and Max being friends, but that's pretty much all we get in the game, and I feel like there's this big disalignment between my character when he feels bad for Max, because from my perspective, we all hated Max, so it feels a little cheap to be sad about the death of a character that means so little to you. We don't even really get to see Max that much throughout the story, and they just hate us for these ambiguous and seemingly unjustifiable reasons. This isn't an issue with Cipanku necessarily, but more so an issue of how this was built up from previous areas. I'd have no issue with feeling bad for Max if Max had been more of a complex character outside of not wanting to murder people. All in all, with regards to Cipanku's plot, it wasn't bad by any means, but I also wouldn't necessarily call it great either, with the stakes feeling quite low, with us bathing before the siege, and just all around with everything including Belsodo feeling like a joke other than General X, who seems to be the only serious member of the group. Now, despite the story not particularly standing out in my opinion, Cipanku does have a lot to offer on the gameplay side of things, and a lot of it is really good. So first of all, the update plays really well from a campaign perspective. Granted, a lot of my Tems were over leveled, Cipanku still brought forth Temtem's unforgiving nature, and I was brought close to the brink of death often when not paying attention to my stamina bar. The island itself is packed with a diverse variety of Temtem, which includes the electric and digital types, which primarily inhabit the island, but also tons of tamers that break the mold and punish you if you're unprepared. I have no gameplay complaints with regards to the main story. It was fun, the dojo puzzle was quite interesting and inspired, the game's new areas are absolutely stunning for their style, and in my opinion, the graphics in general are great, especially as it pertains to the Temtems themselves and the environment. Temtem is one of the most crisp games in the genre in my opinion, and it's no surprise that so many people come back each update. We also got some really interesting new features and quality of life changes, including the teleporter, which is a big change, the return of the crystal skates, which brings forth new light to some previously inaccessible areas, and we got layers, which are a big selling point of this update as it pertains to the mythical Temtem. The layers in particular are, in my opinion, a really cool addition, as these are a group sort of dungeon raid that allows you to have randomized teams, random choices, and ultimately culminate in a boss fight. You have to work together as a team to get enough crystals to unlock the boss lair, and overall it's just a pretty cool mechanic. Defeating the challenge also nets some loot, so that's pretty cool too. The only improvements I could see is if they were to go fully generated dungeons as opposed to a straight line, but I think for a side activity it doesn't need to be overly complex, despite that being pretty cool if it was. They've also added other quality of life changes, such as the ability to change nicknames of your Temtem, the ability to battle wild Temtem whilst waiting for a competitive match, and more. One complaint I and many others do have, however, is that the renaming of Temtem and your player character does cost Pansuns. It's about 2k for renaming a Temtem and 20k for renaming your character. I can actually definitely see why they'd want to charge you to rename your character. That's so you don't cause shenanigans and then keep changing your name so you can maybe continue to scam people or something like that. I'm sure there are ways to trace back your old player characters, but this is something that they do in a lot of games. What I don't understand is why renaming your Temtem is being charged. It doesn't affect the economy, and I think it should just be free. Okay, so the last section on our list is the Temtem designs, and let me just say this is Cipanku's strongest attribute, as some of these designs are downright wild. First, and again, I won't show it, but the mythical Temtem looks hella badass in my opinion, no other way to put it. And we also get access to previously known Temtem like Ragnet and Sparzy's line, which are solid electric types, but also others like the Scarawat line and the Ampling line, which are some really cool Tems. On the digital side, we have a ton of interesting designs, including, of course, that previously unobtainable Ori line, but also Chromion, a Tem similar to Koish in that its types vary, the Hedging line, a rad-looking hedgehog, Lodal, and even Temtem's Ditto equivalent in the form of Mimit. I also think that the addition of electric and digital types will bring a much needed layer of balance to the competitive scene, with a lot of wind types now having proper counters. So to sort of wrap things up, Temtem Cipanku update, in my opinion, has a serviceable story as far as immersion is concerned, but really excels by adding some much needed features like teleportation and a fun way to get loot via lairs. The Temtem themselves look absolutely amazing, and the music is pretty catchy too, imbuing that sort of Eastern vibe. Alright, so is it worth the cash? So firstly, the game costs $45, but that's in Canadian currency, so obviously this will differ based on your region. That said, in Canada, games like Monster Sanctuary and Nexomon Extinction go for about $20 or so. So there clearly is a pricing discrepancy between Temtem and other games in the genre. I would like to further add that the previously mentioned games are fully finished products, while Temtem is still in early access. There is a big distinction to be made here, however, because Temtem likely costs a lot more to make than the previously mentioned games because number one, it's fully rendered in 3D, and number two, the game has to run these very large servers to allow thousands of people to play at once. I do also have to say that Temtem has a much more deeper battle system than Nexomon and has a lot more content in general than Monster Sanctuary. Now, that's not to say Temtem is better by any means, just that I do believe that it should exist in a different price range than those games just because of how much goes into making a game like Temtem. Nexomon Extinction unfortunately doesn't have PvP as of right now, and Monster Sanctuary does, but the server cost would be much cheaper due to it having one-on-one battles rather than being an MMO. I've personally put almost 600 hours into Temtem, and I'm sure a big part of it was because the game was hella grindy at the beginning, but also because it's a fun game and the competitive matchmaking system's pretty cool too. Given what Temtem is, I do think a healthy medium between the honestly underpriced Monster Sanctuary and Nexomon Extinction, which are some of my favorite games in the genre, and the overpriced Pokemon games is where it should sort of sit, and that's kind of where it's at right now. Cipanku took me about 11 to 12 hours to beat, so realistically it's not uncommon for people at this point in the game to have 60 hours and we're still not done the campaign. So I'm definitely going to leave this one to you guys. Do you think it's worth the price or do you think it should be cheaper? And if so, by how much? Or if not, by how much more? Let me know in the comments below, and as per the usual, if you enjoy monster taming content like this, definitely make sure to like and subscribe to this channel for daily monster taming uploads. You can also check out my Twitter page at GymLeaderEd, my Discord, and my Patreon. All links will be in the description. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.